Eyelets and runs are simple, hand-manipulated techniques, often forming the basis of lace. They can be used in a variety of ways to achieve a variety of different effects. Eyelets are formed by transferring one stitch to a neighboring stitch, creating an empty needle. These eyelets can be formed in most any organization and form the basis of knit lace. To form an eyelet, ensure that the empty needles remain in working position. After knitting one row, the empty needles will pick up a float, which will form the top half of the eyelet opening. When knitting the second row, new stitches will be formed in these floats. Eyelets can be used for buttonholes, for lacing through I-cord. The variations are endless. You obviously can't make an eyelet on the edge stitch or the selvage stitch because in that sense you would simply be decreasing. Runs are formed in the same way as eyelets, producing an empty needle by transferring one stitch to its neighbor. The difference here is that instead of leaving the needle in working position, the empty needles are pushed out of work, which forms a float across the span of the needle, opposed to the needle picking up the float in preparation for knitting a new stitch in the next row. The top of runs can be closed off by pulling needles from non-work to working position, essentially creating the top half of an eyelet at the top end of a series of runs. The rest of this video demonstrates super simple variations in forming eyelets and runs. Eyelets can be made in any arrangement. This example demonstrates forming two eyelets on either side of the same needle, but eyelets could be formed across every alternate needle, every third, fourth, etc. And then those positions can shift one space left or right after knitting one or two rows, offsetting the eyelets in the subsequent row. You can create open mesh work in your knitting using these eyelets. You can also form very specific patterns in eyelets, which again essentially form the foundation of knit lace. The only limitation here is that eyelets cannot be made right next to one another. You need working stitches on either side of the needle left in work that is empty to form an eyelet. Runs, on the other hand, can be made across a span of multiple adjacent needles. This will increase the width of the floats between the sections of needles in work and create some dramatic effects. The one note here about knitting across multiple spans of empty needles to form a float is that you can't cap them off with an eyelet in the same way demonstrated previously. Each needle would have to be put into work on its own row, or pick up purl bars to reactivate the needles left out of work.